All right. Well, I want to take some questions because I think everyone has given us so much to think about. We do have some already, so I will start with those. Samantha McCarroll Hine, she wants to know, as we've previously, and I think this question is for Erica, as we've previously talked about diamonds and pearls and the symbol, the artist, being two sides of the same, or the symbol album being two sides of the same coin, would Seven and God Created Woman be contained in the spiritual wilderness period on your timeline, or would that album fall into more of a transition period?
Hey, yeah. So I still consider it spiritual wilderness because it's a time of exploration. So on Diamonds and Pearls, I mean, you have him going back into his raunchier material. There's still some talk of religion on that, especially with the song Thunder. And then Love Symbol, I mean, there's so much Eastern theology on that album, as well as some like traditional biblical messaging. But, and then I think I also saw your other question in there, Samantha. You have to kind of parse out when Prince is using the Bible as a storytelling device versus when he is using it to communicate where his beliefs are. So in God Created Woman, he is manipulating biblical text to just kind of tell this love story. And it really doesn't read as like, these are my beliefs. And I think you mentioned like a lyric about Noah's Ark. And, sometimes it's just a throwaway cool lyric. And again, not necessarily him saying, I believe this story wholeheartedly. So that's what I've tried to do in my research, is kind of parse that difference out. But yeah, to your question, I would still include those albums in the wilderness, so to speak.
All right. Thank you so much, Erica. Theo DePina, he wants to know, what song from Come did you connect with when you first listened to the album? Which song do you connect with the most now, and why? And I would say this is for everybody. Zach, why don't you take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I I think for me, so just to preface this, I'm a late convert to Prince in the 90s. I've definitely been doing my penance for the last several years about being one of those people that's like, I responded more to the 80s stuff, right? And so Come, I think the reason why this album is one of my probably my favorite of the 90s is because that like alternative rock connection was what it made more sense to me than, what is a 20-year-old white guy going to do with emancipation, so like Papa, that really, like, I was like, oh my god, this is what it like. It sounds a little like grunge, but it also sounds like nothing ever. Like, who the subject matter is so extreme, and then it has this like weirdly optimistic ending, and it's just like, that's a song where you hear that and at the end of it you're like, what the hell was that? So that was probably the one that I was like, okay, this album this is interesting. And then honestly, I don't know if my position has changed so much, but I will say, so I don't know if it's like a then and now thing for me, but the other one that I would highlight, that also jumped out at me is Dark, because I just love it's not unusual for Prince, right? Because he did that kind of vintage soul. That's kind of in his DNA. That's his bread and butter. So it's not so much that this is something I've never heard from Prince. He just does it so well, and just like his vocals on that track and the organ, and it's that was another one that I could connect to it as somebody who honestly was never a big fan of 90s R&B, but I've always loved, like stuff from the 60s and 70s, that kind of Southern soul. So that was another thing that I really connected
Erica, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say probably Let It Go when I first listened to it, because that's like the most pop friendly, the easiest one to listen to. And then as time went on, just gravitating toward Papa. But also Come, the title track, and not just in terms of the lyrics, but what he's doing musically, with all the different changes and the way he uses his vocals. Like, I really think I think it's a masterpiece. Not everybody agrees with me, but yeah.
Thanks, Erica. Thomas Brown wants to know, Chris, this is a question for Chris. As an actively working musician, do you find yourself channeling Prince in any of your work today? And if so, is he more of an inspiration, or is there something specific that you take from him? And how does the Come album play into anything that you're performing today?
Definitely. Prince is, you know, part of my cipher. There's a few people that just live in my head. I think about them every day, almost in everything I do. And Prince is definitely one of them. Richard Pryor is one of them. Malcolm X is one of them. It's different people that I think about, you know, how they would approach a situation. And so Prince is constantly, his standard for excellence is what I strive for in everything I do. I just know that he would, if he was here right now on the planet, he would just be doing something that everybody wanted to see. And so that's, you know, that's what I try to bring that energy into everything. And as far as Come, man, it's just, you know, the album was ahead of its time. Like you guys said, like Papa, that song is just so funky and nasty, but he's like pulling like from this Nine Inch Nails energy, kind of like this. It was just ahead of its time, you know, and it's, so I'm always, I guess subliminally it's in there. I don't know if directly, if I go, oh, I'm thinking about Come, think about the album as I want to create this music, but it is one of those projects that definitely is influential.
Oh, you're muted.
Hi, back again. Chris, thank you, Chris. Chris and Tammy, I want to ask you guys the same question. What song from the album did you first connect to and why?
Chris, I'll let you go first.
I hate to sound redundant, but the first time I heard Papa, you know, it was so heartbreaking because it was like, you know, that you know, this situation will happen, and you know, it's happening around the globe. But it was just like so funky, but he was just using this funk to tell the story about, you know, just another way, you know, just the evil that's in the world. And, or just the lack of love that people, compassion that a parent might have for their child. It was such a deep movie and song, and it was really the one that really stood out to me first time. But now as I went back through the album and really, you know, connected with it again, Come, man, it's like an opera. It's like it just going to the what's the word, the Met Gala or something like that. It's like going to the opera, like going to Carnegie Hall, like in your mind, through space. It's such a phenomenal piece of work.
For me, I would say Come in Space. Like I mentioned in the presentation, they are two-part songs. So I can listen to Come and just, it's 11 minutes of bliss, and the build-up, it brings me to tears. And before I go even further, Chris, it's always a pleasure working with you. We did it in a short time frame. So thank you. Looking forward to the next one. But yeah, Come in Space, definitely. Actually, the whole entire thing, you can listen to it from beginning to end. Like Chris said, it is an opera. I love anything Gothic and romance. I grew up watching Dark Shadow. So yeah, it's the whole thing for me, but Come in Space specifically.
Thank you, Tammy. An anonymous attendee wants to know from Erica, if there was no anger, or however people choose to define this dark time period during the making of Come, what spiritual direction do you think the album would have taken as far as using the biblical religious themes? And was I talking that whole time on mute? Okay, we're going to do this again. Erica, this question is from an anonymous attendee. If there was no anger, or however people choose to define this dark time period during the making of Come, what spiritual direction do you think the album would have taken as far as using the Bible religious themes to storytell? Was it successful during this iteration, or would it be positively received in a happier iteration?
That's such a good question, a detailed question too. I would see a continuation of Love Sexy if he didn't have some of the challenges that he was responding to. So, you know, Love Sexy wasn't commercially successful. Graffiti Bridge, another religious-based project, was not successful. You know, so you see Diamonds and Pearls as a response to that. But if that wasn't in the equation at all, then maybe we would see the same with Love Sexy. But also, I mean, his relationship with Maite and all the exploration that they were doing in terms of Egypt and all of that, I mean, that could have still come into play. So you still might have gotten a love symbol album. So it's just really hard to tell. It just depends on what challenges would exist. But in terms of like being well received, I mean, a lot of his spiritual content was not well received. So even if he is happy and spiritual, I mean, that he'd expressed trying to reconcile that and be content with the fact that, hey, I don't have this level of fame that I'm doing, but I'm doing this messaging that I believe to be pure and what I should be doing. And, you know, as he said in an interview I mentioned, I need to rely on God rather than fame. So that was a real struggle that he had. So it just depends on what's coming into his life and what he's struggling against.
Thank you, Erica. The next question is for Tammy and Chris. Beyond having the most amazing subject of all time, this is coming from Camila, what was the inspiration for that masterpiece of a presentation?
Tammy, I'll go. You know what's wild about that? Somebody I saw in the comments, somebody said, you guys filmed this on Friday. Yes, we did. We filmed it on Friday and we edited it yesterday, tonight. And the thing about it was we were both kind of had very busy summer schedules, and we kept, you know, throwing around possible ideas, what we wanted to do, but we hadn't literally landed on anything. And then we were like, you know what, we should just film this thing and really do it the way we want to do it. And then it was just finding the day that everything could come together. We could get the studios, we could do what we have to do, kind of videographer and all that. But the inspiration is that for me, and I'm sure Tammy as well, I'm not even gonna speak for her, but man, Prince is it saved my life with his music. And so any chance I get to honor him and share him my thoughts about his music with my beloved Purple family is always an honor, it's always a blessing. And so and Tammy is always amazing in what she does. She wants everything to be just right, and that inspires me as well to make everything just right. And so using that energy, we came to the table. We wanted to make something that people would love and be moved by. And that's what we want.
Let's see. I asked Chris out of the blue, and of course we had time. And when you think you have time, all of a sudden it rushes, and next thing you know, it's time to do it. So I was like, "Hey, Chris, would you like to present with me?" And he always answers the call and comes through in the clutch. So the inspiration really for the visuals, and I'm going to be honest, you know, Prince always presented to us a complete production, a package, and a visual presentation. And I think 30 years later, it still stands. And it's always about the details for me. It's always about setting the tone. I wanted this presentation to feel like the album cover in that Gothic tone. And while I don't have on all my things now, there was a time where I had my nose and my ears pierced and everything else, and the lip, and just and that whole thing. And I was just this mixture of glam punk rock, and then my Prince stuff, sprinkled in with a little hip hop. So it was a combination of all of that. And I just did not want it to be just a standard Zoom format. I was like, hey, we're going to do this. And we found the location. Chris liked the location, and it happened. And also much thanks to Maya for filming this as well. So it was a team effort.
Thank you, Tammy. I'm going to get to the question from Portia, but I want to drop one in for Zach from just, I guess, from the group about the connection between Dirty Mind and Come. I never really kind of connected those two projects before. Where, when you were researching this particular presentation, did you start making those connections?
Yeah, it kind of took me by surprise a little bit. And I couldn't tell you, I couldn't tell you that it's always tricky. And I guess I'll just say as a catch-all, like when I'm doing this stuff, I'm never thinking about intentionality, because that's just this, when I was coming up as an academic, it's like it's a trap, I don't know what Prince was thinking. And I think in some ways, just thinking in terms of intentionality is, can really limit you. So I don't know if he was being deliberate about this, but it just sort of occurred. I was thinking about the parallels, and from the beginning, I was always thinking, about that new wave moment where it was like, okay, I'm going to sneak myself in the back door because there is because the music industry is in a state of disruption. And there's, this phenomenon going on right now where, Black people are dancing to Devo, and I can find this as a way in for somebody who is a Black artist, but not a disco artist. It doesn't want to be limited to just one thing. So I was thinking about that. The next biggest disruption in music was that early 90s alternative moment. And it just sort of like, it struck me at that moment that it's like, oh, we have this other interesting parallel where they're both these black and white images of him, in front of an elaborate backdrop and centered, and there's the text. And so it was just, it just kind of presented itself to me. And I don't have much more to say about it beyond that, just that it's interesting. He probably didn't mean to do it. But it is this interesting parallel and symmetry. And it's always just kind of, it's cool to see things happen like that. I'm glad to see, it feels like most people here, I was a little worried that people were going to be like, what are you talking about? Because in the past, when I've talked about Come as an alternative rock album, people haven't always gotten it. So, but I should have known that this group would get it,
Of course. Zach, thank you so much. Portia's question is, Chris and Tammy, she first wants to thank you for this interpretation of Come because it so closely resembles her view of the lyrical interpretation. So she wants to know, what are your thoughts from today's first session where the interpretation really saw this album as maybe a little misogynistic? Do you see this side as well?
You know what? I'm gonna be honest with you. I was recovering from this long editing session. I did have that on, and I was hearing some of that, but I definitely want to come back in and catch some more of the seminar, because I did hear some of that, talking about the misogynistic lyrics and all that kind of stuff, that angle of it. But it's something I have to kind of go back and actually kind of dig in again. I would like to hear more about, I like to rewatch that and really get the full essence of it.
I'm the same. We both were working for the past 2 days, literally around the clock. So I definitely have to go back and look at all of the presentations. I caught a few today and some yesterday. You know, that is there. And what I mentioned earlier, there is a sort of BDSM play. So it is controlling in to a degree. But it depends on what's happening. You know, is it control? Is it submission? I think he approached come with intentionality. He's like, I want you to come and I want you to take charge of what's going on, and I want to watch you. And while I'm watching, I'm going to bring myself to joy, and then we come to joy together. And I don't know if I'm off because I didn't see the presentation, but there's a touch of it. But I think then 30 years ago, I was seeing it through this romantic eyes, and I still see it that way. But Prince was Prince. So yeah, there's always going to be a touch of that control. So it depends on your own personal lens. Some people want to be controlled, or you know what? I'm going to stop right there. Next question.
Tammy, I want to piggyback off of that question just a little bit. One of the things when people talk about this as potentially Zach seeing it as an AOR album, but also the song Dark and maybe some other songs on the album that are more traditional kind of R&B. In the world of R&B, the Beautiful Sister, the Beautiful Ohio Players, Sticky, all those kinds of iconic women that have come through videos and album covers and all those kinds of things. You seem to be referencing that a little bit on your presentation. How do you think that that plays into this album, if you view it as a concept album?
That's a great question. Again, I think the imagery is important. And I think Prince is, when he would get into something, and I can't speak for him, but when he would get into something, he would take it to the max. And that is, oh, that's a song. Meaning like he's presenting this album. He's like, you know what? I have to kill off a version of myself to let you know I am not happy. This part is done. And we're moving into a new spiritual revolution. We're moving forward. And I'm done with you. And I'm going to show you how unhappy I am visually, lyrically. To me, it's his Purple Rain 2.0, as far as something being vulnerable, kind of autobiographical into what was going on in his life at that particular time. And yeah, it was dark, but he was also looking ahead. And it's very frustrating to be with a record company that's supposed to be in your best interest, and they're holding you back. You cannot evolve if your team is not on your side, pushing you and believing in you. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that's my take on it.
Thank you, Tammy. Crystal Wise wants to know, and I guess this is for anyone, Come has been compared to the Black Album, but the latter got pulled. We know there was resistance to releasing Come. In what ways, you know what, y'all? In what ways do you think Prince may have been okay with the darkness on Come versus the darkness on the Black Album, since both of them were sort of releases that were controversial?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I'll jump in on that because I love the Black Album. And I think with the Black Album, Prince afterwards had regret, depending on what the circumstances were. Whereas with Come, the darkness is intentional again. So you have a chance to sort of hide something that you put out. And there's some fantastic material on there. But with Come, that darkness is like, this is it. You take it or leave it. This is how I feel. And this is my stance.
Yeah, I would agree about the motivations there, and it's two different situations. So with Come and the Gold Experience, I mean, he's making an artistic statement, and he wanted to put them both out, have them compete, one under Prince, one under the symbol. Whereas the Black Album and Lovesexy, I mean, he's still working with his label, and he didn't have them both. He didn't envision that as a package deal. He created the Black Album, and then he had regrets and wanted to put out Lovesexy instead. And at that time, he's kind of renouncing his past explicit work. I mean, as you see on the Love Sexy tour, he's killing off this version of him. With Come in the Gold Experience, that's not the case. He's using sexuality and spirituality in a very different way, mixing them together again to push out a different sort of message. So you just kind of have to think about where he is spiritually and artistically and what his motivations are.
You know, I will thank you, Erica. I will just send this to everyone. This album seems to be controversial in ways that other albums aren't. And I think that may be because it's so explicitly sexual, but Prince was always explicitly sexual throughout his career. So is there something about the music or the lyrics or how open that he seemed to be? And also, there's this juxtaposition of various musical elements and lyrics, but also there's a song like Papa, and then you have a song like Orgasm, and then you have a song like Let It Go, all in the same space of this album. So why does this one seem to be one that people have very mixed feelings about?
I'll take this one. I think Prince was very clever. And again, I'm not going to pretend to speak for him because I don't know what he was thinking at the time. But what I will say is that he knew that the sex part would grab the listener. So while that's at the forefront, the messages are still in between, in the layers of the lyrics and the songs and the music. And also the media did not help in their marketing. So they just sort of put him as some sort of a weirdo because he's changing his name. Even the little snarky message that Warner Brothers put up with, we know this is confusing. This is a Prince album. We know. So that kind of plants the seed for the customer to be like, you know, I don't know if I'm going to participate in this project. But if you're a real listener and peel away all the sexual content, yes, that's there. Let's not move that away because Prince was both spiritual and sexual, and those worlds marry. But the key part was definitely moving towards the future. So he grabbed you through the sex and then hit you with the message.
Thanks, Tammy. Anybody else want to take that on?
I'll jump
This
on
was
that.
something I was trying to figure out. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. I'll be quick.
Go ahead,
This
go
is
ahead.
something I was trying to figure out too, because it's I also, you know, and I mentioned in my presentation, I think of Come as a dark album, but when trying to come up with reasons why, it was a little tough. And I think I just saw Violet Brown in the chat says the energy is different, and that's the best explanation that I can. And it's not an explanation; it's the best thing that I can come up with. Though there's just like something different about it, and honestly, it seems silly, but honestly, I feel like a big part of it is the way it's presented. You know, just that funereal imagery, and that the fact that it has a death date on it, that is so grim. You know, and so it is like it's kind of like judging a book by its cover, but you can't separate it from that context. So if you were to take any of the stuff other than Papa, if you were to take any of the songs in a vacuum, no, it's not really any more explicit or any darker than any other Prince album, but the something about the full package just exudes a different energy. It's hard to put my finger on. Chris, maybe you've got a better, maybe you can articulate it.
Put your finger on it. How to put your finger. No, listen. I feel like this is a wild thing, right? But one of my songwriting mentors was the great Leon Ware, who I studied with him and worked with him until he died for about a decade. Whenever I went out to LA, and Leon Ware, as most of you know, he was a Motown writer. He wrote the Want You album for Marvin Gaye, and he wrote it for himself, and he ended up giving it to Marvin Gaye. But Leon talked about a lot him being a minister of sensuality, and he talked about with the conversations that Marvin gay and himself, they were strongly wanted to, because of the Christian ties, the Marvin's like his Christian upbringing, they wanted to break the chains of the damnation of sex, and how growing up as a young black man in church, or just in church in general, the preoccupation with sex and how it can damn you to eternal fire, that is a real thing for an R&B singer. There's a real thing to come out of the church, and go into the R&B world and deal with those issues, those topics, and talk about it, and then find a balance of acceptance within yourself. So before Prince, there was Mark, who was doing that, who was taking his music and speaking about the sensuality and marrying it and bridging sensuality and sexuality and saying it's okay, it's a right to be sexy, it's a right to have sex, it's a right to enjoy this connection. And this is another chapter to me. Come is another chapter of that energy of acceptance of sexual liberation, of saying, yo, it is all right, it is okay to be sexual. It is a connection with God. It is a connection with the Most High. This is what God created. So there's a reason why you feel amazing. And I wanted to tap into that. I was tapping into that on the presentation when I talked about visualization and talking about manifesting your dreams the same way that sexual procreation can create a child. Tapping into that energy to say, I'm about to have some amazing sex. What I want to happen in my life. What are the blessings? What are the great things that I want to see, visualize? This is a real thing. This is the utmost connection with the Most High. And Prince was not afraid to speak about that and celebrate that. It's one of the reasons, many reasons we love him. And this is why I feel like it is a controversial album, because a lot of people cannot, they still don't have that, especially in the 90s, that liberation, that acceptance of it, to say, oh, you're talking about sex, you're talking about coming, you're talking about an orgasm. Yes, because it's spiritual and it's real. And Prince was very bold with it, like Marvin was. And then one of the few artists who really spoke about sex so poetically and bridged the gap between sexuality and sensuality, and made it just beautiful and made it just righteous. So this is why I think it's so controversial, because it's so bold. It's such a bold take to speak about marrying all these things, marrying spirits, marrying sexuality. That's my take.
Thank
I
you,
just
Chris.
wanted to add on, one more thing that's very important. As Chris mentioned, we are spiritual beings in a physical experience. So you also have to know for yourself, and this is where things get cross, because as a sexual being, you have to figure out where you are, what stage in life you are with sex. If you are just having sex for fun, if you are now having sex because, that you found someone and that's your exchange, and you love that person, because there are such things as soul ties. So it is a divine thing when you meet that person and you're enjoying that, or sex is just recreational. And also, sex doesn't necessarily mean, and sensuality, you have to distinguish the two. You can be sensual and not necessarily engaging in penetration or putting your mouth on all sorts of things. You can be sensual in what you're having, a fine dining experience, or lighting candles, reading a book, enjoying the weather. Intimacy doesn't necessarily have to mean touch. You can enjoy someone just being next to you and reading or being silent. So you have to understand where you are in your body, in your mind, and you can still have that relationship with the divine and with God and with the universe, and have all those things be connected. So that's what's important. So if you're viewing it through the eyes of come, as in come, let's go, or cum, as in come, depending on what's here. But the double entendre, that's the beauty of Prince.
Tammy, that's a great observation. Thank you, Tammy and Chris. I see, Celie, will you come? You're in the chat, but I would love for you to make that point briefly because I know we're coming to an end about Christianity and regression. If you can come on and make that point. Celie, you there? Celie? All right, Celie made that point, but I just wanted to have him expand a little bit on this combination of Black Christianity, and he's saying it allowed Victorian regression to be projected upon it so that too many African people forgot that there is a difference between sensuality and sexuality. But also to Arthur's point, Arthur is saying that there isn't a lot of sexuality sort of in white rock music. So Zach, why don't you take that one on in terms of AOR? Is this such a controversial album because of its leaning in an AOR direction, but people are hearing this very explicit sexuality? Was that just something that was blowing people's minds too much to be able to reconcile these things?
Wait, just before Zachary answers, and I'm so sorry. In my comment, I was talking about that in the rock pop space, no one's talking about God and Jesus in that way.
Right. And that, yeah, and that's the exact
as
point
opposed
that
to the sensuality, it was more of a spiritual context, unless it's devil, evil, monster, you know, Ozzy Osbourne. You see what I'm saying? If that part's okay, Rolling Stones dance with the devil. I know I'm almost talking about the Rolling Stones, but that was what I was talking about. So it's easy for critics to be dismissive of Prince when he moves in this way, calm, love sexy, as being, you know, weird, eccentric, petulant, and all of that, because that's what Prince does.
I mean, I can speak to that very, very directly. I was nominally raised Christian, but I would consider myself an atheist leaning agnostic. Religion is not a big part of my life at all. And so it's taken, I've had to come around to Prince's religious side, and it has to, there's like a cultural translation that needs to occur, because I think like Chris was mentioning, there's basically any R&B singer, at least before the last 10 to 20 years, had some kind of connection with the church. So even if they're not a practicing Christian at the time that they're recording, they were steeped in this, and just the Black church is a totally different animal than the kind of Christianity that I, again, nominally grew up with. So there's much more cultural significance in that world, and it's not something that I come to naturally, and I think a lot of white critics don't come to it naturally. A lot of white critics are also Jewish. Like I know Ben Greenman's book mentioned that, and he said that he had a hard time with Prince's religiosity because he did not believe in Jesus. So it's like, why is this guy talking about Jesus all the time? And it's a hurdle for sure. I think Arthur, your point is really interesting. For me, hearing a lot about Jesus, I associate that with conservatism, and with cultural conservatism, and so there is a sense of like, it's not punk to talk about Jesus, it's not rock and roll to talk about Jesus, and so it's something that I've had to get used to. On the flip side of that, though, the closest I am at any given point in time to believing in God is hearing gospel music or hearing it. And when I say gospel music, I include, Prince's stuff in that. And so it's a way to connect with these ideas that listening to a preacher or reading the Bible is not going to, it's not going to speak to me in that way. Not that I'm saying I'm going to convert, but that I can access that feeling of spiritual transport through music in a way that I'm never going to in the church.
I think C. Lee has made a reappearance. So C. Lee, do you want to, and thank you so much for that, Zach. That's a great perspective. And I think it's one that really plays a role in the way that people look at and consider this album all these years later. C. Lee, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Sort of this constant struggle between the sacred and the profane based on people coming up in the Black church, and then also the sexuality that is displayed so prominently on this album?
Yeah, and first, I give kudos to this panel because what you guys did have teed up this point. So what I do is quickly try to reverse engineer from Brother Hoskins' point and get to Sister Thompson point, and then crescendo with Sister Sharpe and Brother Rob. I think what people need to understand is that if you start with the rainbow children, there's an understand. Here's what most people don't understand. No matter what you think of Christianity, it is not a European religion. And I think that most people don't understand that Christianity began with people of color. It began in the Middle East. And yet, when you think of Christianity, what you're really thinking of Christendom. That is, you're thinking about European white nationalism being laid over the top of a religion, i.e. the religion becoming a cover for white supremacy. And so when you then understand that when most people think Christianity, they're thinking colonizers, they're thinking Europe, they're thinking people going across the globe using that religion to control and enslave people. Yet if you go back to the actual text, the Song of Solomon, if you go back to the Psalms, if you go back to Corinthians, if you go back to 1 Corinthians 13, if you go back to all the basic tenets, Christianity, as we knew it by the brother named Yeshua, right? The Savior Yeshua was a religion that made a clear distinction between sensuality and sexuality. That's why Song of Solomon reads the way it is. The whole notion that the body is innately negative, the body is innately nasty, is not an African concept, it's a European concept. And so what the Black church has been fighting, you have to understand what the Black church has always been fighting are those core African principles that was rooted into the beginning of Christianity, and how those African sensibilities got separated because the European notion needed to demonize the body, particularly the Black body, to be able to control people. But if you read the text itself, there is not a demonization. In fact, when Peter is refusing to eat certain food because it's nasty, the God says, how can you proclaim something nasty that I made? So if God is telling Peter, do not proclaim something nasty that I made, then there's no way that the body can be innately evil. So Prince spent his entire time trying to remove that notion that the body is something innately evil. Therefore, we could be sensual without being damaged. See, the problem is we've connected pornography to sensuality. The problem with pornography is that pornography makes you a body part. Pornography makes you a breast. Pornography makes you a penis. Pornography makes you a backside. That is not sensuality, and that's not even sexuality. And yet, in the end, I would argue that at not one time Prince ever made somebody a body part. You cannot look at the legacy of Prince's work and say, Prince made you a breast. Prince made you a backside. Prince made you a penis. Why? Because Prince was always working in a sensual realm. Because for Prince, the sensual realm was the way to connect the physical to the spiritual, to have this metaphysical experience. And so I think that when we are approaching calm, we have to be willing to take the brother at what he's saying. He's saying, look, there's both a physical and a spiritual experience, and you cannot get to the spiritual yet through the physical. So let me guide you through this physical experience while I am also myself walking through this physical experience, hoping to become a better person. And if my songs help me become a better person, then hopefully my songs will help you become a better person. And we can all learn how to get beyond the negative things of our flesh so that our flesh becomes a doorway to the spiritual rather than allowing ourselves to be locked completely away from it. I'll shut up.
Come on, Brother C. Lee.